And that's just so we can share this with folks who weren't able to join us here tonight. And so, yeah, as we've talked about, we're going to be joined by lots of incredible guests tonight. Later on in the night, Danielle Basneau is going to be joining us and talking about some of the water work ongoing in Hamilton, as well as some of the underlying perspectives, and really picking up where some are left off on this broader context to how we see and how we relate to water and how that should inform this work. And before we do that, we're just going to hear a little bit about who is really funding all of this destruction, and what's kind of going on and what are the projects at hand. So Trish, are you okay if I throw it over to you to kind of answer the question, who is responsible for all this?
Sure, that's great. You want my whole presentation at this point, or?
Yeah, you should be able to just share your screen.
Perfect. All right, so to answer who is funding this destruction, I'm going to focus on one of the companies that has invested about, in terms of like the Garner Marsh, is called AIMCo, and they had a purchaser behind them. So they sort of like tried to hide their involvement a little bit in the purchase. And AIMCo is stands for the Alberta Investment Management Corporation. And obviously we're talking about them tonight because they purchased the Garner Marsh, which is what we're talking about. But also in the broader context, they're also involved in the Cgl project, which is a project that Wet'suwet'en folks out west are resisting themselves, that we'll go into a little bit. So AIMCo is a Crown corporation, but they also manage funds, pensions specifically, for a huge number of different pension plans in the province of Alberta. So their only legal responsibility and their overall aim is supposed to be in returns to that pension plan. They don't have a responsibility to the general public like the Crown is supposed to necessarily. And if you dig into their boards or their executives and start finding the connections of people there, then you can easily see that most of those people have previously worked in oil and gas or have strong connections to oil and gas industry. So not too long ago, you may have heard of a little controversy involving AIMCo that involved the takeover of teachers' pension via legislation from the Alberta government, who put in Bill 22. And this basically meant that the provincial government took the teacher pensions that were being invested independently with really excellent returns, actually, and they handed it over to AIMCo. And they did that with the LAPP and the ATRF. They locked it in, and those people generally have no choice or consultation in that decision. And sort of note in terms of like the pensions that they're also involved in funding here is the law enforcement, judge, and courthouse workers. So all sort of like policing and legal industry, which we'll tie back to in a little bit. So it can be pretty hard to find information on exactly what AIMCo is doing, because although they are a Crown corporation, they operate like a private entity. So it takes a little bit of digging, but publicly traded investments are registered. So here are their investments on publicly traded oil and gas companies. And you can see it's pretty damn substantial. They're very pro oil and gas. They've basically invested with every single major player within so-called Canada. Continuing on, about 1.1 billion of those investments in oil and gas projects have been investments in projects that are currently or at risk of bankruptcy since October of 2016. They have basically been accused of being an arm of the agenda of the provincial government, which is oil and gas, and furthering sort of like that economic destruction. And basically enabling or acting as a bailout company to oil and gas firms. And now I'll talk about some of the other private investments that have become public. So 85% of the Northern Courier pipeline system that connects them to Suncor, Precision Drilling, which is an oil and gas company, 65% stake in the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which is what we're going to talk about in a little bit, as well as some land investments in industrial areas. So they invested in an eco park in Saint-Bruno in Quebec not too long ago. They've invested in the London City Airport, so London, UK, interestingly with OMERS, so Ontario's own pension plan, is in on that with them, as well as a company called Run House Infrastructure. As well as a 33-acre warehousing site sort of northwest of London, UK, somewhat close to the airport, that is leased to the UPS, and planned, our Unit B is actually leased to Amazon on a 15-year contract, which forms a relationship in terms of like Amazon and warehousing. And the last investment sort of on this page, which is by no means complete, is the Garner Marsh, which we know to be our little slice of a wetland up on Garner Road that folks have been organizing to save and resist AIMCo from paving over into a warehouse facility. So I just wanted to like give that little bit of an overview, because it sort of like shows their two basic interests is oil and gas and like warehousing transportation. So we can guess based on their plans that what they sort of like want to do or see with the area, which is definitely not to retain the marsh whatsoever. So AIMCo has been pretty full of controversies, and I'm bringing this up to sort of speak to how they operate as a company, how they operate in general. As mentioned before, sort of like their holding of the pension plans of police and judges and court workers means that police, judges, and court workers have a vested interest in the success of oil and gas projects, because that actually funds their projects or funds their pensions in a very large way. Which means they also have a vested interest in being anti-protester, or, you know, making sure that repression is pretty tight. So we also heard about the forced takeover of the teacher pensions via Bill 22, and accusations of bailouts that came with that, or being an extension of the Alberta government. But they've also been involved in something called death bonds. I'm not sure if people have heard of this, but it basically is where the Crown buys seniors' life insurance and becomes their beneficiaries, can't say that word, and basically makes it, you know, the Crown's best interest for seniors to die an early death, which is pretty ridiculous. In particular, since they would be in a position of funding healthcare, funding like retirement, homes, funding that kind of like care. And then one of the other controversies that they're involved in, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more now, is the Cgl Pipeline and folks out west who are resisting it. So this is a map of the pipeline that Cgl wants to build out west. And just as a refresher, AIMCo now owns 65% of this project. They funded it. And they co-own it with KKR as well as TC Energy, formerly known as TransCanada. And down here is the territory that we're talking about, and it's Wet'suwet'en territory. And most of BC, I think 95% of BC is unceded Indigenous territories, and the rest are occupied Indigenous territories. So as it happens, this is unceded land, which means it's never been surrendered, it's never been won over, it's never been signed over. The Wet'suwet'en people have sole responsibility for that parcel of land and territory that this pipeline is going through. So along comes CGL, a little consortium of people, and they want to build a pipeline all through all of these territories. It's supposed to be 670 kilometers. It's an LNG pipeline, and it goes from Dawson Creek to Kitimat. It is, as I said, unceded, and the hereditary chiefs have sole discretion on what happens to those lands, to the territory, under their own Wet'suwet'en law. And this is something that the Supreme Court of Canada actually recognized through a court case called Delgamuukw. And they recognize that the territory has never been surrendered, never been ceded, and is the responsibility of the Wet'suwet'en and subject to Wet'suwet'en laws. Therefore, sort of like reinforcing what the Wet'suwet'en people know, or so we thought. So despite this, somehow TCE, or TransCanada, got permission to construct and an injunction to prevent work interference. And they have started construction on this territory. You can see the comparison photos here. These are the same areas. On the right with the snow, you can see the path that goes all the way back past the sort of like cloud cover in the mountains. And that is the right of way that, that CGL has cut through the trees. And it's just like swaths that's interfered with sort of like their wetlands, their water sources already, their hunting, their berry picking, lots of things. So this is despite the Wet'suwet'en supposedly having control over their territory. Another incidence of clear cutting when they were first starting their right of way. And they've been able to do this sort of with the aid of the RCMP. So the RCMP have raided the territory in a militarized fashion 3 times now, and they're prepared to raid it for a 4th. So CGL is currently preparing to drill under the Wet'suwet'en, which is the river that feeds the Bulkley Valley. It's the headwaters for the Bulkley Valley headwaters. And it's clean water. You can drink straight from this river. There it is there. So this picture is taken from, the picture on the left is taken from Innistoten, which is a camp out on the territory. And you can see there's just like a path, like people just walk down to the path and they take a drink of water, they fill up their water bottle and they take a drink of water. And you can see the water on the right, it's glacier fed. So it has that sort of like blue, clear, like extra great water. And it doesn't require treatment. It's just that good. Like they're in the middle of nowhere. There hasn't been a lot of like impact from sort of like capitalism or settlers out there. This is land that has been caretaken by Wet'suwet'en people for a long time. So CGL is preparing to drill under that river. They want to do that soon. The RCMP are preparing for sort of a 4th militarized raid. And I kind of want to pause and let all of this sink in. I feel like I've talked a lot, but just like some self-reflection of like, when is the last time that, if ever, you were able to drink straight from a fresh water source without worrying that it was contaminated in some way? You know, do you know where the food that you ate today came from? Did you grow it? Did you hunt it? Capitalism has basically disconnected us from all of these experiences, in many cases to the point where we turn blind eyes to or accept the ills of our food production system, whether that's, you know, the way eggs are produced, or chickens, or beef, or anything, migrant labor. And it has put us in this position where we're actually like very reliant on the products that capitalism provides, so like oil and gas, which also is then used to further wedge us from balanced relationships and our own sort of moral and ethical responsibilities. So after many years of this corruption, we're basically so out of balance with the world around us I don't know how everyone here identifies, but I found in like talking with people that a lot of settlers or white folks, nature to them is something to conserve, yes, but it's also just like an adventure. It's a park, it's a hike, it's a tree for shade. We don't tend to like live in it or with it. We basically conquer it. And we do that by hiking the longest trails or the toughest trails or catching the biggest fish or getting rid of garden pests or treating the illnesses out of our water with other poisons, or believing in this case, in AIMCo's case, that we can just relocate wetlands and that's not a big deal. I would argue that like colonizers kind of come in and they see conquer as the way to like live on this land and in this territory. But sorry, cat's distraction. But where is it that you want to go to for a rest when your body, or actually like your soul, really needs a rest? And I don't know about everyone here, but my last couple of years have been pretty tough. We've all had COVID, which has been strenuous in lots of ways. We've all lost people. And I've also personally dealt with a lot of repression and intense police surveillance because of my work and organizing on wetsuit and stuff. And I spent 14 months on house arrest, and it kind of messed with my relationships and my brain and my confidence in myself, I guess. And so like, I knew coming out of that to recover from that, I needed to go away from a city. And basically what I needed to do was go to the Wet'suwet'en, which is that river. This is part of that river. And I sort of still have that like vivid memory of drinking that water, like, and it hitting my tongue. It's like freezing cold and just pure. Like it's not like a bottle of water here or a glass of water here. And I think it's interesting, basically, that our my, and I suspect many of our inclinations to sort of like recover or heal, our hearts maybe want nothing more than to be in a relationship with the world around us. So sort of like creating a fuller life that is like more involved in living in the world around us instead of like living separate to the world around us. This ties in with what I'm talking about because this type of like immersion is something that Untitled Camp has been doing out on the territory for a very long time. And Untitled Camp has and always will be a healing center for Indigenous people that have been dispossessed of their lands and culture. That camp gives folks the type of relationship that I'm just talking about healing from. It gives them a home, community. It reintroduces them to their history and culture. And that like deep feeling of like connection and belonging. And Gitumdan Camp, which is a camp at the 44-kilometer road, Coyote Camp, which we're hearing about now, Lixamitsu, Timber Wolf Camp, they're all also providing that healing, and they're also trying to protect their territory from that pipeline. They're defending their connection to their land and their ability to help others reconnect to the land, which is a connection that is, I would say, sacred. It's essential to their being as like Indigenous people. And it's just like healing and centering. I would hope that sort of like through that, folks here can see that resistance to the CGL project isn't about resistance to one pipeline. It's actually about people's lives, and it's about life itself. And it's actually about Canada, our government, our courts, our police forces as settlers, invading a sovereign nation and destroying their entire way of being. It's essentially nothing short of a genocide. And I say that very seriously. And AIMCo, which is the company we're talking about today, the company that has purchased the Garner Marsh, KKR, TC Energy, and the RCMP are all responsible. And I would actually say that all of us are too, if we're silent and inactive in this struggle. This picture on screen is where this CGL wants to drill under the river, by the way, under all of those islands. It's just upstream from Unistoten, and Coyote Camp would be across the shore to the left. Yeah, just gonna kind of wrap up. And I think just humbly offer that as a settler, you know, I'm very imperfect, but I've been doing this work for a long time, both external and internal. And my proposal is that part of reconciliation, if we're serious about it, has to be about a shared connection, relationship, and responsibility to the land itself. Not just the Indigenous folks on it, but to the land itself. It's about making connections with other struggles, instead of adhering to sort of like NIMBYism or just not in my backyard or go somewhere else. And I propose that solidarity is how we grow and how we win. And I would encourage all of us here to kind of like think about the facts that came up about AIMCo today, dig into them a little bit more if they want, and to position themselves against AIMCo and against their colonial capital projects. I would encourage people to be against the destruction that they want to do here, but also especially against the harm they're currently perpetuating in Wet'suwet'en territories, and to get into the streets, get in front of Shell terminals, get on rail tracks, whatever it is that they need to do and can do to support the Wet'suwet'en struggle against AIMCo, and to keep working and organizing against AIMCo for the Garner Marsh. And if it comes to it, stop the bulldozers here for the Garner Marsh, for the Wet'suwet'en, and also for ourselves. That's the end of mine.
Thank you so much for that, Trish. And in kind of like rushing through getting started, because I think we're all really excited. I forgot to introduce Trish. And I think when she's been doing this work for a long time, it's really true. Even going back to grade 1, I think you were sharing that you stole a bird's nest and put it back in the tree because that's where you thought it belonged. And that you've been doing this work and you've been persecuted for doing this work, both here where many of us are calling from in Hamilton, and out in Wet'suwet'en territory as well. And I really want to pull in on 2 of the pieces that you talked about right at the end there, which was this idea of solidarity as well as connection to the land. And we kind of keeping on those themes of solidarity and connection to the land, like people that kind of hold on to those ideas as we move through these next kind of few pieces. So I'm just going to play, we saw what was happening out in Wet'suwet'en territory. Now we're just going to see a little bit about what's going on here where many of us are calling in from. So this video that's about to play just gives you a little bit of a slice of the sounds of the marsh. And so right at the end there, I'm hoping folks heard the bit of a red-winged blackbird throughout there. There was a lot of kind of bird song, and we're actually very happy to be joined by Carrie Hewitson, who among many of the species and the critters we're gonna hear about today also calls the marsh home. Carrie, would you mind unmuting?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. It is a great honor and a pleasure to share my experiences and parts of my life with you in the hopes of educating and preserving this beautiful habitat that I've had the privilege to call home. I was raised to speak up when I see injustice and wrongdoing, and this is one of those times. I may just be a local farmer and not a scientist, but I am passionate and I speak from the heart. For those that don't know me or are familiar with our story, My name is Carrie Hewitson, and I live at 254 Garner Road East here in Ancaster. We are just one of many farming families in this community. My partner, Ron Book, and his family have worked this land here for well over 150 years. The Books were one of the founding families of this area, originally choosing to break ground and settle this very plot of land because of nutrient-rich soil, abundance of trees, all complemented by the natural water coursing through it. Natural wells, pools, and streams crisscross their 100 acres, making it an ideal place to farm and raise a family. Back then, the Books had a dairy farm, utilizing the natural water available to water their cattle and livestock and to irrigate crops. My father-in-law, George Book, now in his late 80s, fondly remembers the water literally bubbling up out of the ground and the hillside, now where the Highway 6 bypass resides. It would collect in low spots, creating natural areas for livestock and local wildlife to rest and drink. These waters ran all year long, rarely freezing or running dry. Some years, the stream could grow to as wide as 10 feet. Over the decades, much changed. The family grew, and with it their children, each seeking to grow their own family and their farm. The dairy farm and homestead soon gave way to vegetable fields. Parcels were sold off only to be leased back. A U-pick pumpkin patch was added and quickly became a community staple for many here in Ancaster. As the town grew, the demand for land also grew. Developers began buying up land, most of it farmland. Houses and plazas soon dotted the area where fields and streams once ran. As farmland became more scarce, other local farmers began leasing land here. Working together, we created a better field rotation, allowing some areas to sit fallow and restore soil health and manage the natural areas, all while keeping a respective berth and buffer around the marsh and maintaining its natural flow. But that would soon end. Last July, I was getting ready to go out to the east field below the marsh and do some weeding. I was brought to a halt when I saw a very large John Deere tractor with an enormous boom sprayer enter the fields from the Garner Road entrance. This field was leased under contract to our neighbor, Ken Marshall, a local garlic and horseradish producer. Instantly, I knew something was wrong. I watched in dismay as the tractor started cutting through the fields and start spraying the crops. Back and forth it went, zigzagging its way through the field. I watched in horror as the sprayer crept along the marsh with no regard as the spray drifted over and around the marsh. I ran for my phone. I called my partner Ron to get a hold of our neighbor, and then I called Nancy Hurst. Along with Nancy and a local concerned citizen group, we had just recently and successfully advocated for the preservation of this exact marsh and wetland. And here was someone trying to destroy what we had so valiantly fought to save. Our neighbors' crops and the wetland were illegally sprayed. An herbicide had been applied. We were helpless as we watched something they worked so hard to produce wither and die. 2 days later, they returned, now with a giant disc, working up and destroying whatever was left. A total of 87 acres was destroyed. We were all then issued termination notices for our land leases, 6 months before our annual contract renewals, all while we had crops in the ground, all meant for local food production. With no thought or regard for our livelihoods or the health and well-being of the land or ourselves for that matter. We soon learned that all this happened to advance an archaeological dig to prepare the land for a proposed land sale. In the short time I've lived here, I have developed a deep connection and respect for this land and its wild inhabitants. I feel fiercely protective of the diversity of species that call this place home, whether they are seasonal visitors on their migration or full-time residents. They are all part of the cycles and patterns that exist here, and are all inherent to each other's survival, and we must give them a voice. The marsh and surrounding areas change every season, every year. As the snow melts and spring runoff collects in low spots, it creates vernal pools. Every year, for as far back as memory goes, the tundra swans and the Arctic geese pause here amongst the vernal pools. They stop here on their migration route to rest and feed for less than 40 hours. Then they take to the skies and continue their arduous journey The knowledge of where to stop, passing from generation to generation. Where will they go if this habitat is destroyed? The marsh during spring also vibrates with birdsong and life. As the frogs and the toads thaw out from winter and the peepers find their voice, they all call out amid the cacophony of spring. We see the return of songbirds, of swallows and killdeer, all in search of a good place to build a nest amongst the marsh and the fields and breed. We see the return of a myriad of warblers and wrens, goldfinches, hummingbirds, bluebirds, and many other species. The wetland also incubates vital larvae. These emerge as dragonflies and damselflies, dancing above the cattails. Midges, beetles, and other insects proliferate the area, creating a vital food source for all the returning bird species and our local bats. Milkweed grows in abundance along the edges of the marsh and the surrounding fields, creating a safe haven for monarchs, swallowtail butterflies, and other butterflies and moths, natural pollinators that are all vital to the local ecosystem. Swaying amongst the cattails and the reeds, we see the red-winged blackbirds, which nest here in abundance. Over the marsh, we see orioles, using the available grasses from the marsh and cattail fluff to weave their hanging nests from the trees, making this place their home for yet another season. In summer, we see many different snake species sunning themselves on the open paths amongst the rock piles. They make a hearty meal of the mice, the moles, and the frogs that live here. We see deer tracks daily, and every year find antlers that have been shed in the field. Wild turkeys roam these parts as well, leaving tracks and feathers as their calling cards. My partner Ron remembers ring-necked pheasants roaming here as a kid. He recalls them being abundant. He remembers chasing them as a kid, but now their numbers are very few. Woodpeckers call this place home as well. The downy woodpecker, the hairy woodpecker, the red-bellied woodpecker can all be heard tap, tap, tapping on the trees in search of insects and seeds all year round. We see a plethora of hawks year-round as well. Some are visitors and some are full-time residents. Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, red-tailed hawks, the northern harrier hawk, broad-winged hawks all frequent this place. The open fields bordered by tall trees with the marsh at its heart offer protection, clear sight lines, and reliable sources of food. Daily, and I mean daily, I see a pair of red-tailed hawks flying over in search of food. They perch in the skeletal remains of dead trees and wait for an opportune moment to strike, feasting on smaller birds, mice, squirrels, and rabbits. The sharp-shinned hawk hunts the smaller birds that seek refuge amongst the shrub brush and thickets of the marsh. The hawks soar majestically over the open fields, flying high and skimming low over fields and along the marsh to stalk and chase their prey. I walk the fields almost daily, year-round, finding the remnants of their fresh kills, the soft down and tiny tail feathers floating on the blood-speckled snow, or the fur left from a rabbit or a hare. Within the very heart of the marsh, I have seen American kestrels, part of the falcon family, perched on little branches and reeds, waiting to chase or pounce upon the smaller vermin and small birds that are always feasting on the fallen seeds. The great horned owl regularly visits us here as well, leaving regurgitated pellets at the base of our tall spruce trees. They nest just beyond the marsh in the wooded area of the original homestead. We use the open fields and the marsh for their hunting grounds. In the warm summer evenings, we hear them every night, hooting and calling to each other. The cavities of dead and rotting trees along the marsh provide shelter and prime nesting habitat for our barred owls and our screech owls. Recently, on a hike out back, I was able to share some of this with Summer Thomas when we saw a bald eagle fly overhead, full in its majesty. Once rare, that is now a common occurrence here. Along the stream, as it approaches Garner Road and the bridge, it becomes a little more wooded with fallen willows and pines. Here, I find weasels and ermines, their colors changing, depending on the season. This is also the happy hunting ground for our local family of foxes. Here they lie in wait, catching groundhogs, rabbits, and hares, often digging them out of their burrows. I find the remnants of rabbit fur often. I have quite the collection of rabbit tails. The fertile fields and the wetlands have always attracted life. With each season, we'd see life cycles and patterns play out here. The constant always being the cycles of birth, migration, and death. For some to live, some must die. It is a fragile balance and clearly illustrates the interconnectedness of all living things. And I fear for that balance. With the current rate of land lost to development, we are putting a vast number of bird species at risk. A study by the Audubon Society recently showed that climate change has affected the distribution of birds of all kinds over the last century. But for some birds that depend on certain habitats, like wetlands and grassland birds, habitat loss has a far larger impact. What will happen to the inhabitants of this wetland if the developers are allowed to destroy it? Many birds are genetically engineered to go in search of food and nesting habitats. But when food and shelter can no longer be found, the journey can become fatal and they can die of exhaustion. Our so-called leaders and people in power have deemed economic growth and urban expansion more important than land preservation. They have shown us time and time again that the extinction crisis, which is upon us, and climate change are an acceptable trade for their greed and their so-called progress. Have we not forced too many species already to adapt to our devastation? When is enough enough? Through this group and others, I hope we can change this. With your support, I think we can.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for joining us tonight and for sharing, just like this little list here isn't close to enough based on what you just shared about who calls the marsh home. And I think, yeah, as we're talking about connection to the land and solidarity, as kind of Trish was talking about, we do want to kind of go forward into kind of thinking about what are the, sorry, Carrie, you said everything is connected near the end. And I think one of the things we want to focus in on is, how does water rather connect us all? And so focusing in on that, Sophie, a new member of our groups, helped us out with some information about the significance of wetlands from a climate perspective as we're in a climate crisis. And so, yeah, why do wetlands matter?
Why do wetlands matter? Wetlands lie at the junction between terrestrial and aquatic habitats and play a vital role in protecting biodiversity. Wetlands are the beating heart of landscapes, and they grow.
Hi, Alex. I'm not sure you can still hear the audio on your end, but I don't believe, unless it's just me, I don't believe anyone can hear it any longer.
Thanks for that,
cut out for
Steph.
some reason.
So just to confirm, no one was hearing anything there. They just saw photos.
That's correct.
Well, let's fix that. Thanks for letting me know.
Why do wetlands matter?
So we're going to fix that in just a second.
Between terrestrial and aquatic
It's actually back, Alex. It's just incredibly quiet. So
Biodiversity.
I'm not actually.
Wetlands are the beating heart of landscapes, and they grow and shrink with the weather and climate cycles, and they also seasonally attract lots of different species and are useful in many different life stages of different species. This makes wetlands amongst the most dynamic, biologically diverse, and productive ecosystems on the planet.
In these photos, we can see some of the different microenvironments that wetlands, in particular marshes, provide. So we have the shallow open waters in the centre, followed by the aquatic vegetation spreading out from there. We then have more terrestrialized vegetation, which can be a significant carbon store, and also provide carbon into the soil, which is then protected by the water. Wetlands, because of their complex shapes and all of these different microenvironments, have a lot of interfaces, and these interfaces are often the most productive areas, not only for vegetation, but also in terms of chemical reactions and drawing pollutants and storing pollutants and excess nutrients out of the water. So the complexity of wetlands is one reason why they provide more ecosystem services than most other ecosystems. And we can see the ecosystem services provided here, from water quality improvement to ecological services such as breeding, nesting, and feeding grounds for different wildlife. More hydrological services that are provided by wetlands include flood mitigation, as these wetlands act as stores for heavy precipitation events and reduce peak flows. They also reduce soil erosion, as increased runoff acts to move sediment downstream, whereas the wetlands hold onto it. Further, socioeconomic services that are provided by wetlands include recreation and tourism and cultural and spiritual significance. More importantly, moving into the future will be the climate change mitigation potential of wetlands. So overall, these are critical services to the environment and to human health. And the fact that wetlands act as carbon sinks means that they will be increasingly required in the future as we all battle the future effects of climate change. One amazing thing about wetlands is how resilient they are, and that is that they still provide these services even when they are stressed by drought or by invasive species such as Phragmites. They still provide the hydrological services and most of the ecological services, even in these stressed or degraded states. And that's evidenced by the number of birds and frogs and toads using the Ancaster Marsh. So the resilience and complexity
Sorry, folks, there, but yeah, there was the end of that sentence was the resilience and complexity of what's going on at the Ancaster Marsh is really something that is remarkable. And this kind of shows the Garner Marsh, the headwaters here, as well as some of the information about in the Ancaster Creek subwatershed, what has already been lost. So the Canadian government has come up with some guidelines about, how much habitat loss is too much. So this is really the bare minimum, this 6, this 30%, this 10, like that is, if you cross that line, we're in the extreme red danger zone. And here you see that, already the surrounding ecosystem and where the Garner Marsh, these headwaters are located is already very paved over. Even if historically there wasn't a super high level of wetlands in these headwaters, they've still lost, I think, something like over 200% of the original wetlands have been lost. And in fact, this Garner Marsh is the last originally located wetland in this subwatershed. It's one of only 2 wetlands remaining in the headwaters, and the other one has already been impacted by development and is not in its original location. And across Ontario, we see that wetlands are at risk. The world is estimated to have lost 64% of its original wetland area. Ontario holding 6% of the remaining wetlands in the world and 25% of the total in so-called Canada. And Southern Ontario in particular is where so much of this wetland loss has occurred. And when we go back to what Summer was saying about situating us on the land where many of us are calling in today, or what we heard from Trish, like this goes hand in hand, like how we've built our cities, how land has been stolen, goes hand in hand with the wetlands we've lost. And that's really only ramping up. So here you can see the kind of colonization, pre-settlement area wetlands and what's left. And that's just like a huge graphic. And this is not like the most up to date. This is about 7-8 years old. So it's unfortunately an even lower little bit of water left in the glass than that. And really one of the problems we've run into with standing up for the Garner Marsh is that wetlands don't have enough protection in Ontario. Until they've been provincially assessed, they can only be deemed locally significant and protected at the local level. Well, the Garner Marsh has these protections, and here we are with a developer taking it to the OLT and kind of saying the Conservation Authority saying we can't do this isn't enough, we're going to appeal that decision. So, it's clear that higher levels of protection are warranted, or a restructuring of our society to value wetlands more is warranted. But even if we took the current process and said, yes, we should use the current process of provincial significance, there's a 260-year backlog. That's the wetlands will never be assessed at this rate. And so Ontario's environmental commissioner, kind of the top environmentalist in Ontario, has recommended to the government that basically all wetlands should be presumed significant until proven otherwise. So we've heard from folks who are directly invested in this. We've heard from advocates, maybe folks who are, like really, really on board with protecting wetlands, but even kind of the bureaucrats and the folks in government are saying this is serious and all unevaluated wetlands should be presumed significant until proven otherwise. And that's not what's happening in this case. So there's a clear kind of gap in what's going on versus what should be happening. And so that's maybe one perspective on the significance of wetlands, but I believe we're really excited to welcome Danielle Boissonneau to our webinar tonight as well. And so Danielle Boissonneau is a Two-Spirit femme, Anishinaabe from Garden River, Ontario. She's a seed keeper, a water walker, a multidisciplinary artist who enjoys the creative space between imagination and action. She values courage, honesty, and kinship. Danielle currently works at Mohawk College as an Indigenous Strategy Training Specialist, and Danielle belongs to the Old Turtle Clan. Danielle, are you able to unmute and join us here today?
Hi.
Hi.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I feel really grateful to be part of a panel that, I feel where I don't have to do a lot of the encouraging towards better ways of living in relation with the land or understanding the implications of wampum agreements, for example, and how that should impact the way that you live with the land. And, just really being part of a panel that has started with people acknowledging the need to act. And so I feel like that gives me space to actually share within my lived experience as Anishinaabe storyteller. And one of the slides that was first shared was this photo that said, I think it was water is life. And it was a photo of myself and my water walk sister, Kristen Vilburn. So I really must acknowledge and send a lot of love to her because without her, the water walk work wouldn't have started. And I think the story tonight that's coming for me is one about how action looked for me outside of a colonial space, outside of colonial, like, I think something for me is that that makes me privileged is that I have the ability to see the world from a different perspective. And it's not just even about seeing it from a perspective, but I get to live in the world a different way. And to me, that's precious, because the way that the world socializes people right from birth, people are socialized to think of the land as property. Everything is property, and capitalism is just the way it is. And continued expansion, there's no other choice. And in a lot of ways, I feel pity for folks, and that I'm so grateful that my people, my parents, my grandparents, folks have survived genocide and made it so that I can be here sharing with you today. And I'm, really honored to be in a space where people ask me to come and share about these things. And so I'm also grateful that you're all here listening and perhaps can take away a bit from what I'm sharing tonight. So my friend Kristen is always down by the water, and that's how we do. Anishinaabe people, we live in relationship with the water, and it's not just like going and for a visit or a stroll. It's like Kristen was noticing changes that were happening on the water line, and this being increased pollution, not just pollution, but wastewater. And she noticed this for a really long time, really, really long time. And she said, Danielle, there's something we got to do, and folks who may know me may know that, like, I'm Anishinaabe Kwe, and I don't believe in the power of the Canadian government to tell us anything about what we're doing on our own land, the way that we protect it, the way that we live with it, the ceremonies that we do. Like, for me, the Canadian government is illegitimate. And so, doing a petition or like even a rally or something like that, it's not that these things are not valid or good ways of doing things, but for me, I was like, what can we do? And my people, what we do is we look to the animals and we look to our elders to see what they're doing. Because, if you think about it, like the animals and the elders, like they have such a connection built on experience and like relationships, like with these places. So who best to look for advice from than these folks? So grandmother Josephine Baugh, water walker, the original water walker, she said, if you're going to do something, she's like, you just got to do it. And what that was for me and what that was for Kristen and for all the people who walked with us on the water walk is about us doing the work for the water. And that's praying for the water, singing to the water, acknowledging that the water's alive and saying, like, we see you and you're beautiful. And thank you so much for giving us life, even after all we put you through. We walked 42 kilometers around the perimeter of the Great Lakes, or the Great Lakes. Wow. No, we didn't do the Great Lakes, the harbor. We did the harbor. And for 4 years. And at the end of the 4 years, it came to light through a Freedom of Information Act made by a spec reporter, basically confirming what Kristen had noticed, was that there was a leak. And it was immense. And there was so many gallons of wastewater just spewed into the harbor. And I think something that is really important to understand is that it's not just a perspective. Like the way that Anishinaabe Kwe live in relationship with these life forces is transformative, it's magical, and it's powerful. And that's the thing. And so, you know, just earlier today, there's an announcement about more children found, more recoveries of children's bodies from residential schools. I think what's really important is to make a connection between the genocide and the protection of the land, because what happens is the Canadian government knows full well that Indigenous peoples, when we're connected to our lifeways and we're connected to the life that surrounds us, and when we're connected to each other, that we're powerful. And this is exactly why they implemented these things like the Indian Act and residential schools, the 60s scoop, why we're overrepresented in jails. Like, it's not an accident. And so I think today what happened was that there was a really awesome opportunity for everyone to hear about ways that you can help, you know, like understanding that like there's more to life than maybe the way that you see the world. And like, what does that mean for you? You know, explore the world. Explore is maybe not it, but like live in relationship with the world. Like, this is what I really hope for everybody, you know, and like to take that responsibility to heart. And the thing is that like, just because, you know, Hamilton Conservation Authority says that they're going to do something doesn't mean necessarily that they can do the thing. There's power in our love for the land. And that's where that has to come from, you know, and it's not so much about resistance, and it's not so much about like, it's about how we are living our protection and living the protection of the land and the water, because at the end of the day, it's us that depends on the land and the water, not the other way around. And climate change is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And so we have to do something now. I did want to take a few moments, actually. My water walk sister, Jadine, is here. And after the 4 years that we did around the Hamilton Harbor, we've started walking through the Ancaster wetlands and doing a different part of the harbor. So I'd like to invite Jadine to share a bit about this, because she also has done so much work in carrying on with the work of the water bundle for the Hamilton Harbor. That's okay.
Yeah, I'll just I'll change my name to my real name, I guess. I'll just say a few things. Thanks for passing that off to me. Yeah, this is like the second one of these Ancaster wetlands calls that I've logged onto, and I'm like really grateful to see like, you know, 80 plus people on these calls every time. And yeah, I've been friends with Danielle for a long time, and supported her on the water walks that she undertook around Hamilton Harbor. And when she was done her 4 years, I really just felt like it couldn't stop. And it happened to be around the same time that it came to light that, you know, 25 billion liters of raw sewage had been very irresponsibly dumped into Coutts Paradise over a 4-year period, and the city had covered it up. And yeah, and I was so upset by that. And Coutts Paradise is a place that I really love, and it's actually a place that I go quite often. My partner has this really silly inflatable boat that he likes to take out, but it's actually a really, really nice time to go out on Coutts and blow up the boat and just float around. And it's really sad when you bring people out there and you tell them like, oh, this is a really beautiful place, but like you can't actually touch the water. And now, of course, there's signs up that say like not only like no boating, no swimming, no drinking, it actually says like don't touch the water. It's really bad for you. And so I really decided that I felt like I wanted to do a walk around Coutts, and I felt committed to those 4 years. And I talked to Danielle about it, and she was really supportive, and I'm very grateful for that. And we did the one walk, and it was a really great first year. It's a little bit shorter than the walk Danielle used to do, which is nice for people, although it's much more on trails than the one around the harbor, which was quite grueling through the industrial zone. But yeah, it's really close to my heart, and you know, with both, a few things have actually stopped the water walk from happening last year. And one of those things was COVID. And the other one of those things was, well, it was COVID that stopped the walk. But during these last few years, I've also been, I struggled with like a few attempts to get pregnant and have a kid. And so there was also like a lot of concern about me leading the water walk during a time where I was pregnant. And I was like carrying a child inside of me that has the very first experience of just being surrounded by water. And I think that even though I'm not very good at following pregnancy teachings, because they're often about me taking a break and sitting down and focusing on myself instead of other things, it's been a very challenging and like rewarding experience to grow through that. And I am actually currently about 9 months pregnant. I'm only about 20 days away from my due date, so that's exciting. And I've been thinking of the water a lot, and I've been thinking about, you know, I feel very committed to staying in this place for a while, as long as I can afford the rent, I guess. But it feels so important to me to be connected to the water around here, not just the water. When you go up north, or when you go away somewhere and you can swim in the water and you don't have to check the E. coli rating before you get in. I remember we used to do the toxic tour water walks there, and I remember actually Danielle I remember at one point she was walking down the street with her kids, and she went and she was putting tobacco in the dirty puddles on the side of the road. She was like, still water, you know. And so I still go boating at Coots, even though you're not supposed to touch it, and I still try to connect to that water source and to the water source all around us. And so this Ancaster wetlands thing, it really is upsetting to me. It's extremely upsetting, primarily because I trust nothing that comes out of the government's mouth. You know, last year they came out and basically said that it was kind of the decision of the investigation that the Coots 24 billion liter spill of raw sewage didn't even really impact Coots Paradise that much. And of course, RBG, Environment Hamilton, all these other groups like disagree with that. But they basically said the water is already so sick that it didn't even really notice the 24 billion liters of raw sewage. I don't buy any of it. They're also looking to install a new sewage pipeline through Ancaster that would dump raw sewage right into that water source, and the Ancaster wetlands feed into that, right? The Ancaster Creek, and primarily the Spencer Creek, which is also a river, a creek around this area that I feel very connected to. It's where I went and did ceremony for all of the miscarriages that I had. So I go and like visit those babies down there. And I've also had just like really incredible experiences down there with wildlife that I can't even really like explain. It's such like a magical little stretch. And really we can call one the Ancaster Creek and the other one the Spencer Creek, but like all of that water around that area is the same water, right? And so, yes, I'm very grateful to see so many people on this call. And I'm really, really, really hoping that this project just like can't go through. And I'm really, really hoping that all the people here are a great like indicator of the resistance that this project would face if it came up. But also, I'm just really hoping, kind of like what Danielle said, is that in learning about these things and maybe getting angry and whatever, you're actually driven to just go down and spend time at the Spencer Creek and the Ancaster Creek, you know, down at Coots Paradise, whatever it is, and just really like connect with that water and understand what's going on with it, and then learn to love it, even if you can't touch it, you know, or touch it a little bit. That's also probably fine, you know, maybe just don't put your fingers in your mouth after or something. But yeah, that's all I want to say. So just Marcy, thank you, Danielle, for ceding a little bit of your time to me, and just thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thank you for all the people who put on this thing. Thanks Trish for doing all that research, and Carrie for talking of the farm. Yeah, I just I'm really happy to see so many people out. So that's all.
Thank you both for joining. Sorry, you're seeing me try and do two things at once here. But yeah, and like, sorry, just trying to pull something out of that, but there's so much to pull out. And as we kind of go into this kind of next steps part of the evening, and where we have some asks that we're asking folks on the line to take action, I think it's really important to ground why we're taking this action. For some of us, I think we maybe came on this call hoping to take action just to protect the Ancaster wetland. This might be near some folks' home. We're hoping through this call, through what Trish has shared, through what Danielle has shared, through what others have shared, is that like it's more than this. This is a bigger picture. It's about protecting water and building a relationship and understanding how our relationship with the water has become so damaged for so many of us. And so in like a Hamilton context, 24 billion liters of sewage going in, no follow-up. I think that's a great, like if we're to frame what our city's relationship with our water, I think that's something to think about. And so one of the things that we've done is we, at the 350 as well, working with other partners, is we have launched the Save Our Streams Hamilton campaign. And the purpose of this, well, we have some campaigns going on right now that you're going to hear. We're really hoping that we know there's so much water work that needs to be done, and we want the Save Our Streams kind of campaign to go on. So if you're sitting at home thinking about the water that you are most connected to in this area and what it needs, we'd love for this to be a jumping off point for you to connect with your neighbors, to use some of the resources like a website to share information. We're happy to help you host Zooms to really make this a tool folks can use to connect around protecting their water. And so while that's a little bit of the longer term vision for the Save Our Streams website, we do have a resource
guide for those businesses in April.
We do have a little bit of a first campaign.
Hi everyone, I'm Nancy
and so
Hurst,
here's
and I'm
Nancy
excited to
sharing
tell
what
you about Save Our
is.
Streams, a new initiative in Hamilton. We're a coalition of concerned citizens advocating for the preservation of waterways, wetlands, streams, habitat, woodlots, natural heritage, and biodiversity in Hamilton. We're a subgroup of Hamilton 350's Conservation Authority Watch program, and it was through volunteers watching at the Hamilton Conservation Authority's meetings early last year that we learned about one property's plan to slide over the marsh and build a 1.3 million square foot warehouse complex. As you can see, this massive complex would completely obliterate the marsh, which forms the headwaters of the Ancaster Creek subwatershed and is a significant groundwater recharge area. Tampering with this site will likely result in flooding downstream because water always finds its way. We learned from our previous success when we stopped both the permit approval and the offsetting policy that the path to success is found in reaching out to the public, letting people know what's going on, and most importantly, giving them an easy way to speak up and be heard by decision makers. So we started by creating a website with the goal to helping people make their voices heard and to share whatever up-to-date information we have on water in Hamilton. And this is what our landing page looks like. And we do encourage everybody to sign up to receive our weekly email updates. And it's really important to add your email to our email to your safe sender list, or at least check your spam and your junk and your promotion folders, because sometimes our emails end up in there. We're currently running 2 campaigns on our website. The first one is to save the Garner Marsh, And secondly, to encourage the board members of the Hamilton Conservation Authority to replace Chair Lloyd Ferguson with a more suitable conservation-minded chair. This push to have Ward 12 Councillor Lloyd Ferguson removed from his position of the chair of the board is because he's repeatedly demonstrated that conservation is low down on his priority list, and we're advocating for a chair change when the HCA members vote for their choice of chair and vice chair at their annual general meeting on February 3rd next month. Ferguson has pushed for the developer's permit to pave the marsh to be improved. He's pushed for a watershed-wide offsetting policy to be adopted at the HCA. He's motioned for a sewage overflow pipe that would vent into Ancaster Creek and for that to be installed to vent into the creek. And he voted repeatedly on City Council to hide the details of the Shadok sewage spill from the public. So we simply must have a conservation champion at the helm of the HCA, and Mr. Ferguson has demonstrated himself to not be that person. So if you agree and you want to make your thoughts known to the voting HCA board members, we have an easy way to do that by heading over to the new chair for the HCA tab on our website and click the link that says take action, send an email to the board. You'll be redirected to our easy one-click email tool, which sends your message straight to the board members and the executive assistant at the HCA. So to use it, simply start by filling in your name and contact details in the boxes on the right. And at the bottom, you'll see a larger box where you can start writing your message. And you just click or delete the tip that is written there for you just to get you started, and then start writing your message. And then hit send, and off it goes to the Conservation Authority Board. And to date, I'm happy to report that as of this morning, 186 emails have so far been sent. So thank you for your attention to this important campaign. And we certainly hope that after February 3rd, we'll have a conservation-minded and progressive leader at the helm of the Hamilton Conservation Authority Board. Thank you for listening.
That was great.
Alex, you may be muted.
It's only been 2 years of this. Sorry, folks. But yeah, sorry, what you missed there is me saying thanks, Nancy. As Danielle was sharing, a new chair won't be all we need. There's much more kind of deeper work in building relationship with water to be done, but having a chair that's not kind of advocating for the destruction of the HCA and natural areas would sure be a great first step, or at least make that work a little bit easier. And Nancy mentioned we're running 2 campaigns. So Dawn, given that we're running a little over time, would you be able to just kind of quickly give us the lowdown on what's going on with the developer's appeal of the Conservation Authority's original decision not to allow this wetland to be offset and slid over? Why is this suddenly up in the air again? What's going on and what are we doing about it?
Thanks, Alex. I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Yes, good. Okay. As most of you know, this battle reached a peak last June when 7 delegations and over 200 people wrote letters to the Conservation Authority urging them to turn down a development permit sought by these developers to destroy the marsh, not just relocate it, destroy it, and then create a pond off to the side in a convenient spot for themselves, which would be a place for runoff from a project that would cover virtually the entire area with buildings and parking lots and truck bays. That was turned down by the board, by the Conservation Authority Board. We were very pleased to see that, but the developer appealed it. Apparently didn't inform the Conservation Authority. The appeal was launched in June, but the Conservation Authority Board didn't find out about it until November. And it is now going before the Ontario Land Tribunal. I think we have Phil Pothen with us tonight from Environmental Defense, and he can give us an update on what that situation looks like. We know that the Hamilton Conservation Authority plans to defend its position at the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. Environmental Defense has also decided to become a party to this action and represent the public interest there as well. And we will be doing fundraising to support the costs involved, both from Environmental Defense, but also from independent experts that we will be calling as witnesses. So Phil is there. I think
Phil, I'm going to throw it to you in just a second. One thing we will say is we also have a one-click tool on our website. So if you go to saveourstreamshamilton.org, you too can join the fun at the Ontario Land Tribunal by requesting participant status. And so Phil's going to talk a little bit more in just a second about what Environmental Defense is doing. And how they're going to be registering as a party in the proceedings. But we're encouraging everyone on this call to head on down to saveourstreamshamilton.org and click on the campaign to save the Garner Marsh and just fill out. It's like you're looking at how difficult this is. We have some instructions there, but it's super simple. And the deadline is coming up fast. The deadline is the 28th. So that is 2 days from now, this Friday. So just one last time, saveourstreamshamilton.org, click on the campaign to save the Garner Marsh, and you just have to pull in some information here, and that can help you stay informed on these proceedings as well, and we can make sure there's a large public contingent watching the fight that's about to come out. So yeah, Phil, please let us know, how is Environmental Defense getting involved, and what's precedent is at stake here?
Sure, yeah, so I think there might be someone who has their mic on. There's a bit of a reflection, but yeah, so I'm Phil Pothen.
Sorry, Phil, we can't hear you there.
Oh, hi, folks. I think there's a little bit of an echo here. Someone might not be muted, but I'm Phil Pothen. I am manager of the Ontario Environment Program at Environmental Defense, but my other role is I'm an in-house counsel for Environmental Defense. And as mentioned, Environmental Defense is just on the verge or about to hit send on our request for party status in this proceeding, which is the developer's appeal of the Conservation Authority's refusal of their application to essentially destroy this wetland and build another one instead. And so I just kind of want to explain why Environmental Defense is getting involved. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the arguments we're going to make because, obviously it's litigation. We don't want to tip all of our hands at this stage. But I mean, first of all, we have a direct interest in the outcome of what happens on these subject lands. We've gotten lots of input from supporters in Hamilton who want to make sure that there is someone there who's going to hold the line on protecting these wetlands or this particular wetland, and regardless of any side dealing with the Conservation Authority itself, there's someone to really get strong evidence out there to make the case that there really shouldn't be destruction of this wetland. But the bigger piece that the bigger implication of this decision is around a concept called wetland offsetting. And basically that is whether conservation authorities are permitted or even obliged to approve the destruction of a wetland on the premise that some other wetland is going to be constructed, and that somehow the new wetland will replicate all of the features of the old wetland. And so, the question is, under what circumstances that is allowed under the regulation. So Hamilton Region Conservation Authority has its own regulation, which prohibits destruction of a wetland. And note that it doesn't just say provincially significant wetlands. So that's a bit of a red herring. It says it prohibits the destruction of a wetland unless there will be no adverse impact on flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, pollution, or the conservation of land, which is a very broad category, and there's dispute over what that means. So, it's our position that, there's been no demonstration here that the new pond, and what they're proposing is essentially a stormwater pond that they propose to build, is going to prevent any overall loss in these features that are supposed to be protected. And certainly it's not demonstrated in this instance. But, I just wanted to draw attention to, Environmental Defense's involvement on this issue generally, and the conclusions that were drawn by the previous panel. There's a conservation strategy advisory panel that was created in 2018, which really looked into this question of when and whether this concept of offsetting could be allowed. And the key premise, or one of the key conclusions that they drew, was that it should never be assumed that offsetting is even possible for a given wetland. Oftentimes it will not be possible, and therefore it cannot be presumed that a conservation authority, it's just a matter of proving the right amount of offsetting. It's totally open to a conservation authority to say no. And then secondly, that offsetting is only supposed to be a last resort where for some reason it's just altogether impossible to avoid actually damaging or destroying the wetland in the first place. So that means that it doesn't mean from the landowner's point of view that they get to do what they want. There has to be some overarching reason why it's impossible to avoid destroying this wetland. So it's not can we avoid it and still do what we want? It's can we avoid it, period. So it's really only supposed to be a last resort, and the developer is treating it as something that they're entitled to as of right. So that's basically what this is about. And environmental defense was part of this original committee that really set out this approach to wetland offsetting. And the position that the developer is advocating here is completely contrary to the approach that's described here, that basically the major environmental NGOs and other interests all agreed on. So, that's a big picture policy reason why we're intervening to oppose this appeal.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I know myself and so many other folks on this call are glad that environmental defense has our back. Like going to the Ontario Land Tribunal is not an accessible process. And to kind of link this to some of the other conversations we've been having, like because of how this procedure went through, the city of Hamilton has a consultation document with First Nations communities, and whether or not that's a great policy, I think is up for interpretation, but it has a policy. But because this has gone through the Conservation Authority first and not the city of Hamilton, there has been no conversations with Indigenous communities about paving this wetland over. We've jumped, and now suddenly we're at a court case at the at the OLT, where so many steps have been skipped. So we're so grateful to have someone kind of helping us with the procedural and the policy-based fight. We're continuing kind of on the grassroots campaign, and we're hoping that together, all of these efforts can make an impact. And that's really why we are encouraging folks to go to the Save Our Streams website to take some action. But one of the other things that you can do there that's going to be so important for these two campaigns we're running right now to save the Garner Marsh and to elect a new chair of the HCA is to have some resources. And so right in the top right-hand corner of the Save Our Streams website, and I think someone's going to be going and putting the link in the chat as well, we have a GoFundMe going. And I just want to thank everyone on this call who's been generous enough to donate already. We're hoping to use this as a bit of a slush fund for water work in Hamilton starting, and I think our biggest expense is going to be helping environmental defense hire an expert for the OLT hearing so we can ensure that this is a win for our community. And so if anyone can make even a small dollar donation at the GoFundMe that I think is being put in the chat, and it's also in the top right-hand corner of the saveourstreamshamilton.org website, would really, really appreciate that donation to help care for our water, as well as to start other programs and other campaigns, because we know so much is needed to protect our water and to take action to protect our water here in Hamilton. And so this is really just the start. So thank you everyone who's been so generous so far. And if you are able, we would sincerely appreciate you to consider making a donation to our GoFundMe. We'll be following up as we kind of continue fundraising for this campaign. But right now, this has already helped us get a website off the ground. It's already helped us print some posters. And if donations keep coming in, we'll be able to keep this campaign going. So thank you, everyone. And please consider taking this out of the webinar, sharing it with your networks, taking some of the things you've learned, as well as this GoFundMe link, so we can keep this work going. And so that brings us to maybe a little bit longer than you were expecting, the end of our webinar. And so we really want to just kind of focus in on these kind of pieces that you can do to take action today. You've heard from so many different folks with lots of different perspectives. And I think that's really where the richness comes from, where the water connects us. Protecting the water is something that can unite us and bring us together from different mindsets and different perspectives. But we've also heard today the importance of really building a relationship with the land and with the water. And so asking folks to really think about, when you think of your personal relationship to the water, what is that? Is it the tap water you drink, the water you shower in? Is it the natural areas you visit? Like, where does the water you interact with come from? The water you rely with come from? What's your relationship to the water? Taking a step out, what's your town or community's relationship with the water? What's Hamilton's relationship with the water? What's our province's relationship with the water? You know, if you're a part of these colonial systems and you are a voter and you could use those things, what is the relationship with the water, and how can you change that at an individual level or at some of the other areas that you occupy identity? And so you can also take action, and maybe this is part of kind of how you start kind of going forward from here. At saveourstreams.hamilton.org, the two campaigns we talked about, as well as our GoFundMe, are located there. On the 350 website, you can say no to the criminalization of those standing up for what is right. There's two Drop the Charges campaigns that you can participate in on the Hamilton 350 website right now, whether it's for caring for houseless Hamiltonians in the middle of winter, or for standing up for Wet'suwet'en solidarity. Folks are being criminalized by the Hamilton Police Services and have charges put against them. And so it's really important that we as a community rally behind those who are at risk and who are suffering because they have taken actions to protect our neighbors and protect our water. And you can find those links at hamilton350.org, and you can take action there. As well, if you go to the yintaaccess.com website, you can find out more ways to support Wet'suwet'en land defenders exercising their unbroken, unextinguished, and unceded rights to govern and occupy their lands. And so this is not all you can do, but these are some starting places. And I think a lot of folks leaving this call are looking for things to do, have felt moved by some of what our speakers have shared, and are looking to participate themselves. And this is our recommendation for 4 places to start having an impact. And with that, it's a real, as has been said before, thank you everyone for coming. We're so excited to have been able to do this. We're going to transition to a few questions, a bit of a conversation, but we will kind of be cognizant of the time that we've had already. And so if folks need to jump off, that's all right. Thank you everyone, particularly our speakers, for taking so much time out of their day to share their perspectives and their research with us. We really appreciate it. And I think now I'm going to hand it over to Jim and Steph to kind of hear from, kind of facilitate this next part and hear from all of you. And thank you one last time.
So thanks so much, Alex, and thanks as well to all of our speakers for giving us such detailed and insightful presentations. As with last time, you guys did such a fantastic job and covered so much information. We don't actually have a lot of questions for the Q&A. That's kind of beneficial because we are a little bit over, but we do have one really great question that I think would be great to ask before anyone has to jet. That being said, if you need to head out, this will be recorded or is being recorded rather, and will be posted on our website. After that, we will have an open discussion for anyone who would like to stick around and just have any other questions that we aren't going to cover in this very brief Q&A for the sake of respecting other people's time. So you are more than welcome to do that as well. I'm going to throw it over to Anne. I'm not 100% sure she's still with us, but Anne, if you are and you want to ask that second question you shared with me, that would be great, just so we can kind of get an idea of where we're at with, what's happening with the request from One Properties and where we might be moving in the future.
I don't need playing with the drill.
Sorry?
No.
Okay, I think, Sarah, I'm going to mute you. I think your mic might be on. Other question real quick for you, Alex. Is there a goal for the fundraiser? That was a quick question.
Yes, there is. We would love, if at this point next month, we had a slush fund of $10,000, because do you know what $10,000 can do? We can hire an independent expert to participate in the OLT, ensure that there's a huge scientific backing with environmental defense's legal arguments, but we will also be able to put some ads in the Spectator, make sure everyone in our community is aware of what's happening, and we'll be able to better connect with folks kind of taking action, and maybe even launch some divestment campaigns and build up some pressure on those funding the destruction. But we need some resources in our toolkit, if you will. So if we could get we're starting March 1st and heading into March 1st with $10,000 in that GoFundMe, we'd be well positioned to start working on those things. And we're, I believe, already 1/10 of the way there.
All right, that's beautiful. So no pressure, of course, but if you got a few extra bucks hanging around, you want to help us out, that'd be really wonderful. Help Hamilton out and help our natural spaces out as well. Okay, Anne, I will open it up to you for that question, and then we'll probably move into open discussion. If you have any other questions you want to throw in there, Anne, because you've had some great ones, just out of respect for time, I'm going to ask to focus on just the one for now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's been a great evening again, Alex, and everybody else that was involved. Thank you very much. Also, I'm thinking, golly, with the fundraiser, if we each pitched in $20 tonight, you'd be well on the way there. Anyway, my question tonight was based on, what is your sense of the success of the appeal that the developer is making to have those warehouses built on the Garner Marsh, given that right now they are not allowed to do it? So what's your sense of their success?
And that's an open question to any of our panelists. I'm not quite sure who might be best to answer that. Phil, maybe Dawn, not sure, but anyone of our panelists that thinks they've got anything to throw in, go right ahead.
I can jump in. You can hear me? The problem with this appeal is that it's not just an appeal that would destroy the Ancaster Marsh and allow the developers to proceed with the plans that they've laid out for this area. It would also open the door for developers to do this all across the province at all conservation authorities. So that's the serious danger that's associated here. It's certainly a catastrophe if we lose the Ancaster Marsh, but it is a far greater one if we lose it at the Ontario Land Tribunal, where the precedent then allows developers in other parts of the province to do the same thing, to go to conservation authorities and say, you can't actually protect wetlands. You have to allow us to cut you a deal to destroy the one that's there and replace it with something else that we say is just as good. So that's the central problem. The wetland, the area that they're trying to do development in is part of the Airport Employment Growth District, an area of Hamilton that was where the urban boundary was expanded in 2015. And it is the headwaters, not only for Ancaster Creek, but also for 20 Mile Creek, the Welland River. It's the highest point of land between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And as a result, the kinds of schemes that are being proposed in the Ancaster Marsh are certainly a threat to other wetlands and streams and headwaters throughout that whole area.